All right, guys, you are going to be creating a digital version of your stamp designs. Everybody should have finished the worksheet to design a stamp series where you are thinking of something that you celebrate in your life, and that's going to be the theme for your stamp series. And you're creating 6 different stamps that all share that same theme. And once you have finished designing your 6 stamps, you're going to choose the one that you think is most successful, and you're going to create a digital version of that stamp. So this is how we're going to do that. We'll be using the Photoshop or Photopea.com program. You can choose whichever you want. If you are in class, you may use Photoshop on the class computers. If you're working from home, you may use Photopea.com, or either or. So you're going to be creating a digital stamp, choosing one of the designs that you created on your worksheet. Step 1 says to create a new document on Photoshop or Photopea, whichever you're using. You're going to use the 5 by 7 inch if you would like a slightly longer document, or if you want a perfect square sized stamp, you may use 5 by 5 inches instead. Make sure that either of these sizes you are using the 300 dots per inch setting. You're going to name your file your name stamp. So my document would be named Mrs. Wade stamp. Make sure you're naming your document so you can tell which one you're uploading when you're turning your work in. Just helps keep you organized. So step 2 says that you can use a reference picture if you want, or you may draw your stamp design free-handed using the brush tool. So I'll show you what that could look like. So I've decided to create a stamp series using my favorite foods as the theme, and I decided to use a reference picture, and I'm going to use these avocados because avocado is one of my favorite foods. I love to make homemade guacamole and avocado toast, and my kids just love eating the avocado right out of the skins with the spoon. So I was going to go ahead and do an avocado. So I used a reference picture that I just found doing a Google image search. I saved it to my computer and I went to File and I went to Open in Place and I found that picture, saved my computer, and I uploaded it to my document on its own layer. If you wanted to, you could also just simply do a Google search and you could find a picture that you like and right click on it and go to copy image. And then you could come back to photopea.com and go to edit and paste. And that's another way to add a reference picture to a new layer on your Photoshop or Photopea document. So once you have set up your document, and if you're using a reference picture, you've added it to a new layer, you're going to create another new layer on your canvas. And we're going to name this new layer Paint Layer because we're going to be doing our painting for our stamp design on this layer. And you also want to make sure that if you're using a reference picture, that you're naming that layer reference. So you know that's where it's at. So the way I did my design was I took my reference and I went up to the opacity settings on my layers and I just turned the opacity of my avocados down just a little bit so I could see my paint layer a little bit more clearly. I then equipped my brush tool from my toolbar and I used the trick that I showed you guys during our hamburger design activity where you hold down the Alt button and that turns your brush tool into the color picker. And by doing this, I can click anywhere on my picture and I can copy the color of whatever I'm doing. So this is if you're using a reference picture. So I'm just going to click right here on my avocado. And you can see down here on my color picker, I've copied that color. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click with my brush tool and I'm going to make little dots where I am just painting in that color. And it's kind of hard to see because the color matches the avocado almost exactly. But if I turn my reference picture off, you'll see that I'm starting to paint. And I'm going to do this uh, using the Alt button and copying different shades of my color. And I'm going to start filling in this paint layer with color, kind of painting out this avocado using that reference picture to guide my design. So I'm holding down Alt and switching colors and clicking and continuing to paint. So let me turn my reference picture off so you can see how that's starting to look. So I'm just using my brush tool and clicking and making small dots, and I'm using my Alt tool while I have my brush tool turned on to copy whatever color is underneath the area that I'm currently painting in. So this area where the little avocado pit was, I'm painting a little bit darker. I'm copying that color, and this part's a little bit lighter, so I'm painting that. All right. So here's a little bit more of what that's going to look like. So when you're done, you're going to have something that looks like this. I decided to only do 2 of the avocados. I wanted to keep my stamp design simple. So now I've got my layer that I painted in here. And now what you're going to do is you're going to find the blur tool on your toolbar. So I'll go ahead and come over here. And the blur tool is shaped like a little teardrop. And what this does when you select on it, it works just like the brush tool. It looks like a little circle, and you can make it bigger or smaller with the bracket key command that's next to the letter P on your keyboard that we've practiced with before. And you can use this tool to make parts of your painting blurry. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm just clicking, oops, my blur tool back. And that's just kind of making the areas of my avocado painting blurry. And I can use this to blend my painting together to create a bit more of an artistic painterly style to this. So you guys can practice using the blur tool to blend your colors together. You can also right click on the blur tool and you'll see there's a couple of other tools. We have the sharpen tool, which pretty much does the opposite of the blur tool. The blur tool makes whatever you're painting on a little bit more blurry, and the sharpen tool makes it a little bit more sharpened and clear. So it's almost kind of like you could go to that tool and sharpen any areas that are blurry on your painting. We don't really need to use this tool so much, but another tool that we could use is the smudge tool. And this tool has a little finger kind of showing you that it's smudging the paper that it's touching. And that's exactly how it works. It's kind of a fun tool. So you can click on that tool to select it, and you can actually use this tool to smudge and kind of blend your colors together even more. So you can see how I'm kind of just clicking and dragging. And this tool is blending all of those shades of green and brown that I use for my avocado together. And this is creating a really nice kind of painterly look to my avocado design here. And so we're going to end up with a finished result that looks like a digital painting, which is kind of what we're going for here. So when you're done, you're going to end up with something that looks kind of like this. This looks kind of like, an avocado that somebody painted with real paint, because I used the blur tool and the smudge tool to blend all of those little dots of color that I create with the brush tool together. So now this is the design that I'm going to use to create my stamp. I'm going to then add a gradient layer. So right here, I've got my gradient. And I chose some colors that I thought would complement my avocado. My avocado is mostly greens. And if I think about our color theory, the complementary color to green is red. So I created a kind of reddish orange gradient here. You don't have to use complementary colors if you don't want to. That's just kind of how I thought about the color that I would add to my gradient. So I created this really nice background to my stamp. And then I used the text tool to add my stamp designs. So I added the origin of my stamp, which is the United States of America. I added the year that it was created, which is 2021. And then I added my denomination, how much I want my stamp to be worth. So I used the type tool to add both of those elements, and I just chose a type that I thought would fit the style of my stamp. And then, if you guys want, as an extension, you can do a one last detail to make the stamp look really realistic. So I'm going to be adding the perforations to my stamp, and I'm going to show you guys how I did that. I'm going to come down here to my shape tool. Remember, we use this tool to create the cheese on our hamburger, and I'm just going to click on that, and I'm going to use a rectangle. I'm going to go up to my fill, and I'm going to choose the color white because I want to create my white background with that perforation border for my stamp. And I'm just going to click, and I'm going to drag and make a rectangle that's slightly bigger than my stamp. And because the layer I'm creating it on is behind it, you guys can see that that shape is behind my stamp. If you're creating it right now, it might be on top and it might block all of your stuff. But all you need to do to fix that is just take wherever that shape is and drag your layer down below your painting and your background so you can have it behind and arranged properly. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to name this perforation because that's what it is. Hit enter. I'm going to use my move tool to adjust the size and make it a little bit more even. I'm going to make it about that big. That looks good. I'm going to hit enter. And now what I want to do is I want to add those little perforation borders, that kind of like edge where we would tear the stamp away from the sheet. So this is how I'm going to do that. First of all, because this is a shape layer, I have to edit it. So to do that, I'm going to right click on my perforation layer and I'm going to go to where it says rasterize. And this is going to turn my shape into pixels that I can edit and I can erase or brush over. So now that I've rasterized it, I'm going to get my eraser tool and I'm just going to use my eraser tool to erase little half circles in the edge of my stamp to create that perforated border. So you can see how that's going to start looking like a real stamp. Okay. It doesn't have to be super even. You can, kind of just eyeball it. Mine's probably not going to be perfect because I'm not measuring out the exact increments in between my little shapes here. But you guys can play around with it and you can make it as exact as you want. But this is just kind of like a fun little extra thing. You don't necessarily have to do this. All right. And then an additional thing that you can do to make this look even more realistic is you can double click over on the side of your layer. So not on the words where we would rename it. You're going to double click over here in this kind of empty area on your layer. And that's going to give you this layer style menu. And you can do different layer styles. And the one that I'm going to use is going to be the drop shadow. And that's going to add a little shadow underneath the layer of your stamp to make it look like it's three-dimensional, like it's sitting on top of something. And I think that's a pretty cool little design. You can go back and continue adding your little perforations with the eraser tool. And then, of course, you're going to save this as a PSD and turn it in to your assignment on Google Classroom. So have lots of fun with this, guys. Remember that this little perforated edge, that's just a bonus. You don't have to do that, but if you're feeling like you'd like to or you have some extra time to work, it's a fun little detail to add to give this a really nice finished look. All right. See you guys later.